Hey guys, so in this video I'm going to show you how to answer language paper 2, question 2, which is about inference. So this question is going to look something like this. So you read two sources and then they will ask you to use details from both sources to write a summary of the differences, or it could say similarities, but usually differences, of the differences between, and they give you a topic. In this case, it was the behaviour of the children at the two schools. It's an 8-mark question, and the skill that they are looking for in this question is inference, which means working things out from the text which they don't tell you. So what I'm going to do in this video is first of all just show you how you can actually do this skill and what it means. Then I'm going to show you a step-by-step method to get full marks in this question so you can easily reach a grade 9 overall. So the difference between inference and analysis is very important to understand. Analysis is what you do in paper 1, and analysis is explaining the meaning or the effect of what the writer wrote, while inference is working out something they didn't write, figuring out something that they didn't actually tell you and saying what it lets you work out for yourself. What else could be going on? They didn't say, but you can figure it out. For example, if the text says that the students are riotous and violent and disrespectful, then you might infer from that they are not learning. Okay, so you'd work that out for yourself, even though the writer didn't say it. That's called inference. Now, it's important to know the difference between these two words and make sure you get them right. So to imply is when a writer suggests something. That's what a text or a writer does. To infer is when you work it out. So the text implies that the character is silly, but the reader doesn't imply it. That is wrong. The text does not infer. Texts don't infer. Readers infer. The reader infers the battle had already finished. So it's also important to know the difference between inference and evaluation. Evaluation is what you do in literature. It's also what you do in paper 1, question 4. Evaluation is when you decide which opinion of what the writer said is actually best. But in inference, you don't need to talk about those opinions. You are working out information, facts, information. Information, though, could include feelings or attitudes, but it's information. It's not your opinion. It could be the writer's opinion. You're working that out from what the writer said and trying to figure out the thing they meant, that they didn't say, but they did mean it. So, we are looking at implicit information. Very important word to know. Implicit means that it has been implied. It's literally the verb imply made into an adjective. So if something is implicit, you have to infer it. The writer didn't say it, but they made you work it out. Now, it's important to know that explicit, the opposite, means said directly. It does not mean clear. Something could be explicit, said directly, but still not clear, like this. The institutions of the education system are inadequate to performing their duties. And that means the schools are bad at teaching. But I think you'll agree it's not very clear. They've used unnecessarily complicated vocabulary and a long sentence. It's explicit, but it's not clear. On the other hand, you could be implicit, but very clear. The girl didn't say anything. She just sat in the corner and cried. It's very obvious that she is sad. It didn't say she was sad. So it's implicit, but it's still obvious. It's still clear. So now that that is understood, I'm going to show you what you have to do to get a grade 7, 8 or 9. You have to be perceptive and detailed. Detailed is a simple term you explain in depth and precisely, and perceptive means you make inferences, so you work things out, that are less obvious or maybe more complex, things that you have to figure out for yourself. So that is perceptive. Okay, now a good way to be perceptive is when you're practicing these questions, write down 3 or 4 things. 3 or 4 things you can work out, inferences, in other words. Excuse me, and then expand on. Write more about the 3rd one or the 4th one, not the 1st or 2nd, because they are probably more obvious. You write about the 3rd or 4th, the less obvious ones. Expand on those. Then you'll practice that skill of perceptiveness, which examiners literally have to look for. So, in this question, you're going to have 2 texts, a bit like this. You'll have source A and source B, and they'll be about the same topic. They're usually from different periods of time, and they have different attitudes, but they relate to the same topic. So the question is going to ask you to compare the two. So we have to write about both of the texts. So the first step is we're going to notice interesting details. The second step, this is when you are reading the text, so you can underline those interesting details. The second thing is to make an inference about what they reveal. So think, well, what does that mean? What can we work out from that? So if the writer says that the sweets were so chewy that it took a group of 6 children a whole afternoon to finish them, and if you had any baby teeth left, they would be pulled out, and that's an example from a real text. If the writer said that, you might infer that the writer thinks the sweets are very bad for you because they damage your teeth. So you infer that. The writer didn't say that they're bad for you, but you worked it out for yourself. Now, once you've done a few different inferences, you compare how similar or different the overall texts are. How similar or different are the overall attitudes towards the topic. And finally, you rank them in order of importance so you can focus on the most important similarities or difference in your answer. So how do you structure your answer to this question? Well, you need to write 2 paragraphs and you need to write an integrated answer, which means you mention both texts all of the time. You mention both texts in each paragraph. So you are continually comparing. That's one of the things that examiners expect you to do to get to a grade 7 or above. So paragraph 1 and 2 will follow the same structure. You can call it pie if you want, P-E-I, or pie-pike, because there's a C at the end. So point is simply where you state the idea you're going to work out or infer. The evidence is the quote that backs it up, and the best evidence would be an embedded quote, and even better, a cluster, a group of short quotes that relate to the same point. And then the inference is explaining how you worked it out from the quote. So you do that PEI for text 1. Then you do PEI again for text 2. Then you do a comparison where you explain how they are similar or different. Then you repeat the whole thing again in paragraph 2. And that's all you have to do in this question. Follow that simple structure. You do not need an introduction or conclusion. They don't give you many marks. They are a waste of time. 2 things to bear in mind. Remember, you are consistently comparing. So all the time you are comparing. And remember that we need to summarize, so work out the most important inferences and don't just explain every single detail. And definitely don't just say what happens in the text. You don't get any marks for that. So let's look at a couple of examples. Okay, we've got 2 texts. So here is the first text. It is about a child's experience, well, an adult's experience remembering when they were a child and their experience with sweets. That's why I used that example earlier. So here is the text. In summer, the concrete footpaths were hot. The tarmac footpaths were even hotter. Bubbles of tar formed to be squashed flat by our leathery bare feet. Running around on gravelled playgrounds throughout the spring, by summer we had feet that could tread on a drawing pin and hardly feel it. When you got to the cinema, the first thing you did was stock up with lollies. Lollies was the Australian word for what the English call sweets and the Americans call candy. So you can infer, by the way, that the text is set in Australia. Very simple, easy inference there. Some of the more privileged children had upwards of 5 shillings each to dispose of, but in fact 2 shillings was enough to buy you as much as you could eat. Everyone, without exception, bought at least one Hoadley's Violet Crumble Bar. It was a slab of dense, dry honeycomb coated with chocolate. So frangible was the honeycomb that it would shatter when bitten, scattering bright yellow shrapnel. It was like trying to eat a china vase. Okay, interesting exaggeration here. He says it's like shrapnel, which is the debris left behind by a bomb. So it's probably not really quite like shrapnel. Also, it probably doesn't completely shatter when bitten, or you couldn't really eat it. So he's exaggerating, and you can infer, by the way, that frangible means fragile. It was like trying to eat a china vase. The honeycomb would go soft only after a day's exposure to direct sunlight. The chocolate surrounding it, however, would liquefy after only 10 minutes in a dark cinema. Fantails, that's another kind of sweet, came in a weird blue packet shaped like an isosceles triangle with one corner missing. Each individual fantail was wrapped in a piece of paper detailing a film star's biography, hence the pun fantails. The fantail itself was a chocolate-coated toffee so glutinous that it could induce lockjaw in a donkey. People had to have their mouths chipped open with a cold chisel. One packet of fantails would last an average human being forever. A group of 6 small boys could go through a packet during the course of a single afternoon at the pictures, but it took hard work and involved a lot of strangled crying in the dark. Any fillings you had in your second teeth would be removed instantly, while children who still had any first teeth left didn't keep them long. Right, now this is obviously exaggeration, hyperbole. So why is the writer exaggerating so much about how dangerous these things are? Well, that's up to you to work out. I'll give you some ideas. Maybe because the writer doesn't like these sweets and wants to warn you not to eat them. Maybe because the writer's affectionate and is trying to create a picture of a nostalgic memory of a more exciting time in the past when things were really dramatic and interesting like they seem to be when you're a young kid, and everything seemed extreme, so they're trying to create this extreme image. So it could be a positive memory as well. The Star Lolly, outstripping even the Violet Crumble Bar and the Fantail in popularity, was undoubtedly the Jaffa. A packet of Jaffas was loaded like a cluster bomb, with about 50 globular lollies the size of ordinary marbles. The Jaffa had a dark chocolate core and a brittle orange candy coat. In cross-section, it looked rather like the planet Earth. Right. So here, we've just got more details, and you'll notice again a comparison to weapons, which might suggest, you might infer, the writer chooses these similes in order to suggest that these sweets are very dangerous, okay? That's up to you to figure out. These are possible inferences you could make. Okay, source B. Now remember, you've got to think about the similarities and differences. This is an older text from the 1800s. The last thing a child asks is how the sweet it snaps up with such eagerness is made. Yet the manufacture of these delicacies, or should I say necessities, of the nursery is a thing worth witnessing. A marvellous change has come across public opinion respecting sugar and sweets of all kinds. They used to be denounced by tender mothers as trash and messes, and possibly because they were so denounced, they tasted all the sweeter to the little ones. Now we would not wish to make taboo that which delights young taste buds the most. In moderation, there is nothing more wholesome than sugar. It is nourishing and warming because of the large amount of carbon contained in it. In the past, sweets were not a specialty in England. There were no large factories for their production. All the higher class sweets came from France and Italy, but the introduction of steam into the process has made England the world leader in manufacturing sweets. Now, sweets are made on the larger scale and are much cheaper. The basic style of old is also gone. The eye must now be satisfied as well as the tongue, even in the cheapest items. Think of a halfpenny worth of sweets done up in a ruby-coloured gelatine packet. It is true that some of the more showy sweets made in the past were colourful, but it was metallic colour containing the most virulent poison. Okay, just a few things you might have noticed here that you could use in your inference. Well, we noticed that they talk about changes from a negative opinion in the past to a positive opinion of most mothers now, which is in 1868, but they're comparing to even further in the past. And you'll notice perhaps a positive attitude. You'll notice perhaps that there are still dangers. But you'll notice also they seem to be proud of how more sweets are made in England, how they're cheaper, more abundant, and they seem to see this as a sign of progress. The famous scientist Dr. Hassel's analysis of this painted confectionery, published some years ago, exposed the villainous manner in which this vividly coloured confection was made attractive to children by poisonous paint. The brighter the hue, the more deadly the sweet. The brilliant green, for instance, with which the confectionery was adorned, contained copper toxins. So you can infer the writers also worried about the possible effect of these sweets, especially in the past, but might also be glad that they no longer make them that way. It is easy to understand the bad name sweets acquired when thus made up. No doubt many young children were absolutely killed by excessive eating of these artistically poisoned candies. Dr. Hassel has heroically delivered us from this source of danger to our precious children. Nothing but harmless vegetable colours are now used, which, if not so brilliant as metallic ones, are quite safe. Today, it is wrong to use metallic colour in confectionery. However, it is just possible that some of the old sweets may still be for sale, so I bid parents beware of any sweets with vivid reds and greens, for they are sure to be poisonous. Now, this last sentence is quite strange, because they go from it is just possible, even though they're now illegal, to sure to be poisonous. So that doesn't really make sense. So this writer seems to be maybe joking with us, maybe they're trying to scare us, maybe they're not being honest. It's up to you to decide. These are all things you could infer from that juxtaposition between just possible and being sure, which is kind of the opposite. So you can now see how the two texts have got different attitudes. So in one, it's an affectionate, nostalgic memory of the past. In the other, they talk about how the past sweets were dangerous and deadly and now they're better. It's more optimistic about things getting better in the future. It's also more overall negative about the effect of sweets, quite possibly. Whereas the first one jokes about them being dangerous, but doesn't seem that serious. Of course, you might not agree. You might think the references to weapons suggest they really are serious about them being dangerous, rather than just creating an affectionate, nostalgic memory. It's up to you to decide what you infer. But can you now see how you can think of similarities and differences between the overall attitudes of both these texts, and can you see how answering Language Paper 2 Question 2 is so much easier using this method? To recap, what you need to do when you are reading the text is pick out the important details, make an inference, so work out what they reveal, compare the different or similar situations between the two texts, and then rank the importance of those similarities so you know what to write about, and your paragraphs, 2 paragraphs, are going to follow the pie-pike structure. Point, evidence and inference about text 1, the same thing about text 2, then a comparison. Then you repeat the whole structure in paragraph 2, so you mention both texts in both paragraphs. Hope that was helpful, everyone. Now, if you found this video useful, please just press the subscribe button, because I have more content on all areas of English, how to get a grade 9, and like this video as well. And then I will see you very, very soon.